Good morning. I hope you're all doing well this morning and welcome to our final Civic Music Summer Studio session. My name is Joyce Beyer and I'm excited to be here this morning to give you the inside scoop on what's being played by the Belin Quartet this week. As always, if you have questions or comments, feel free to put them in the comments section of this video. You can also tag friends there that you think would love to see this video even after it's aired. And stick around after the lesson and I'll give you some information on how you can win free tickets and do a fun activity while you're listening to the music. If you're ready, I'm ready. Let's get going. Welcome to week 9. We're going to start off by talking about our goals for today. So goal number 1, by the end of today, I want you to be able to say, I can describe some common articulations used by string instruments. Goal number 2, by the end of today, I want you to be able to say, I can compare and contrast composers Beethoven, Glazunov, and Joplin. So to start off, we're going to review. The instrument I'm holding in my hand is a viola, and it is a part of the string family. The string family, traditionally, they are instruments made out of wood. They have strings. We make those strings vibrate. That is how we create sound. I'm talking specifically about string instruments that are bowed string instruments. So we have this right here, and that is the primary way that we create sound on our instruments. So we're a little bit different from like a guitar or a harp that absolutely have strings, but they don't have that bow. So our first goal today was to be able to describe some of the different articulations used by string instruments and string musicians. So first, we got to talk about what is articulation, especially in music. And an articulation is a term we use to talk about how we create sound, how we make our sound is a weird way of putting it, I guess, but essentially we're talking about like the style in which that sound is created, not just that the sound happened. And for us in the bowed string family, almost all of it comes from this right here, the bow, or at least our right hand. This is how we cause our string to vibrate and make sound. So the first thing we're going to talk about are 2 very common terms, pizzicato and arco. When people are first learning how to play a string instrument, one of the very first ways, we don't even have the bow in our hand sometimes. I'm going to safely set mine down. We take our hand and we just pluck the string. Now, I say that this is one of the first ways we learn how to play. It's by no means a baby version of playing. We use pizzicato in very real music because it creates a different kind of texture and a different kind of sound from when we play with a bow. In either way, we're trying to make sure that we get the string to vibrate. So you have to be careful how you do a pizzicato. If you pull up, we get a snapping sound, which there's technically a type of pizzicato called a Bartók pizz, and that is what they do. They try to get that snapping sound. We normally don't want that. So you're trying to pull a little bit sideways and up just to make sure your string rings. And then arco is the general term for you need your bow now. When I play and I'm switching between the 2, I don't even set my bow down. I either stick one of my fingers out, or if you're doing a long section of pizzicato, you can make a fist and then pluck this way. So those are 2 of the very common. We play either pizzicato or arco basically all the time. Going on to a little bit more specific about how we use bows, DETACHE versus SLUR. So DETACHE is the term for detached bows, meaning separate bows. So every single bow is its own note. And it doesn't mean that the notes are actually detached. They can still be very smooth and connected. They just are all their own separate bow. Whereas a slur, I put multiple notes in the same movement of the bow. I think that both are very valuable. Some different types of phrasing will require you to do different types of bow strokes. So it's not that one is better or worse. We use both of these to try and get the best version of the phrase across. So normally this little minuet that I'm playing, we do one separate bow, 2 slurs, and then some more separates. And that's what would create the best version of the phrase. So it's usually not all or nothing. We kind of swap it up to make the type of sound that we want to hear. Going on, another style of bow stroke is what we call a martele, or an accented bow stroke. Another word that is commonly associated with like the accents is called marcato. And essentially what we're doing when we accent a note is we are making it sound more aggressive. We're adding a bite to it. And so in order to accomplish that with my bow, I use this finger right here to add some weight. So I don't know if you can hear this right now, but my instrument's making a little bit of extra sound because I'm making sure that I really bite in. And so I can change the weight and how much bow I use to make it more energetic, more aggressive. So instead of the normal, a martele or accented version would be. This piece, probably, that's not the type of style we would go for. But accents can be a great way to emphasize a point or to make it sound really exciting. And so it just adds kind of texture or something else to the music that's being played, so it's not all the same. Going on, the last one I'm going to talk about today is a pretty cool type of bow stroke, and it's pretty popular in a lot of different styles, and it's called spiccato. So you'll notice that the notes here, they have little dots on them. Those are called staccatos, and they basically just means that the notes are separated. There's a little bit of space between them. But specifically, a spiccato has our bow bouncing. It does not mean that you just let your bow do this, because then we don't have control. So you always start on the string, and you kind of pick the bow up like this. So when I was first learning, my teacher would have me set my bow down and just practice picking up, having nice loose fingers. And what a spiccato does is kind of, I don't know, it makes it sound kind of nice and light. There's more air to the notes. So there are certain styles where we just know that all of the little eighth notes that we're going to play are going to be spiccato. Otherwise, a composer might put that in because they just, again, it sounds way different to have your bow bouncing than to have it go. It's not that one is better or worse. You might like the sound of one and not like the sound of another. But composers use all these things, and musicians use all of these different styles of articulations to add intrigue, to make it interesting. Just like I change how my voice sounds and I add more emphasis to things, I'm articulating when I talk. And we do the same thing with our bow or with our right hand to make sure that our instrument is articulating as well, and we get the right type of sound that we want. Okay, we talked about articulations. Now it's time to talk about our composers. So before we talk about them, let's review. A composer is a person who composes or writes music. Composing is the term we use for creating music, writing music. And we talk about these folks because we want to know a little bit more about them. We want to know where they lived, when they lived, if there were any cool facts about them. That makes the music that we're listening to by them be a little more interesting, because you might understand a little bit more about their culture or why they were the way they were. So the first person we're going to talk about, very famous person, his name is Ludwig van Beethoven. He lived 1770 to 1827, composed in what we consider the classical era of music. But he's a person that, when we're talking about music and eras, he definitely composed in the classical era, but he started doing things to kind of push the boundaries of music and what ensembles did, how many instruments were in those ensembles, and he started getting us into later time periods because of the things that he was putting into his own music. He was from Germany, moved to Vienna, so definitely in that Western Europe area. A little bit more about him. I think one of the best known facts about Beethoven is that during his life, he went deaf. That's awful and sad. And I think about what would happen to me if I lost my hearing being a musician. But what I think is so interesting about Beethoven is, even though he lost his hearing, he was still able to compose because he knew the instruments so well, because he knew music so well. He could actually hear the things he was creating in his head. And so some of his most famous pieces, like his last symphony, Symphony Number 9, he never got to hear that being performed. Even though it's this huge piece with like a full orchestra and a full choir, he was able to write all of those parts and make it sound beautiful without ever hearing it with his own ears. He wrote 16 string quartets. So he's pretty well known for his string quartets. He also wrote for a ton of other things, though. He was really good at piano. He was really good at violin. And so there's a lot of different types of pieces of music out there that are by Beethoven. One interesting fact about him, he apparently didn't fully know his birthday. He thought that he was born later, so that he was younger. And I think that's because people said it might have been because his dad wanted him to be considered like a virtuoso when he was really young. So if we made him sound younger, it would be more impressive when he was really good at piano. But that was apparently an interesting fact about Beethoven. He wasn't sure what year he was born. Beethoven is a very, very important composer, and I think you'll really like the music you're going to hear by him this week. But I want to move on now to our next composer, Alexander Glazunov. Glazunov lived after Beethoven died. So he was born in 1865, died in 1936, and he's from Russia. So same, greater area of land, but different very much in terms of what their cultures were like, what language they spoke. He composed for the Romantic era. He played the piano, and apparently he was composing by the time that he was 11. And by the time he was 16, he had already had one of his compositions performed by a major symphony, which that's super impressive at such a young age, to not only create a piece of music, but to then have professionals willing to play it because they liked it. That's very interesting. A little bit more about Glazunov. He was also a conductor. So we learn the majority of composers had some other job that they had in order to make money. In Glazunov's case, he was a conductor. So he would go and places would hire him to conduct, especially if they were playing his music, because then he could conduct his piece and know what to do with it. He also was a teacher, and he taught at the St. Petersburg Conservatory, and he ended up becoming the director there. And all of this was happening during like the Russian Revolution and during World War I. So he worked at that conservatory. Very interesting composer, also for the fact that he wrote for an instrument that a lot of these other composers didn't write for because it didn't exist at first. He wrote for the saxophone. So he has a really famous saxophone concerto that apparently people who play the saxophone really like it. Going on to our next composer, someone I really am excited about, and I really like this composer. His name is Scott Joplin. He was born in 1867. So kind of a similar time to when Glazunov was born. He was either born in 67 or 68. There are actually different places report that he was born at a different time. And then he lived until 1917. He was born in Texarkana, Texas, which I Google Maps it. It is 10.5 hours away from here in Des Moines. So if you want to do a road trip, it's just like directly south. You can go visit the hometown of Scott Joplin. Scott Joplin is really important because he is one of these composers that really helped create this style of ragtime music. And ragtime is, I'm going to read you the actual definition because I think it's a good one. It's a style of popular music that uses syncopation, and it's often played on piano. It was created by Black American musicians in the 1890s, which is when Joplin was. And ragtime is this style of music that kind of evolved and influenced what we now consider jazz music or big band music. A lot of these syncopated rhythms that you hear in ragtime are syncopated rhythms that you would hear later on in jazz music as well. A little bit more about Joplin. He traveled a lot as a musician. So he traveled all around the South, and he also traveled to Chicago. He traveled to New York. And in addition to composing music, he also went around playing all of his music. And he also taught as well. He wrote over 100 different rags, which are, a rag is that ragtime style of music. And he also wrote a ballet, which I think would be really interesting to watch in a ragtime style. And he also had 2 operas. And I think it's kind of sad. He was a composer that he definitely had some things that were popular when he was around and he was going around performing it. But I think he got even more famous after he died, because some of his music was then used in movies. So there's this movie, it's an old movie called The Sting, and it used some of his music. And because of movies like that, he ended up winning Pulitzer Prizes for his music. But he didn't necessarily get all of that fame when he was alive. Very good composer, though. Someone that I actually really enjoyed playing his music on piano when I was learning the piano, because it had a lot of energy, a lot of fun rhythms. All right, so we talked about our 3 composers. Let's talk a little bit about the pieces you're going to hear and how we can compare them. So going right back into Scott Joplin, the piece you're going to hear this week is called the Maple Leaf Rag. And this was by far his most popular rag when he was alive. It's fast, it's very energetic, and like I said, it was originally for piano, so it'll be interesting to hear how it sounds in a string quartet. The piece by Glazunov is his 5 novelettes, and these were interesting because each one of them, there's 5 movements, obviously 5 novelettes, they represent a different culture or a different style, and so he kind of picked different parts of the world and tried to create a piece of music that embodied the types of things that you would hear there. So there's one that represents Spain, one that represents Asia, Hungary, and then some for Russia because he was from Russia. And the way that he was able to kind of make these cultures shine in his music is he would actually use folk tunes that were common for those areas. And so he would use that core folk tune and then kind of make it into the piece that he wanted. And then going back to Beethoven, going in reverse order from the composers we talked about, you're going to hear a really beautiful string quartet by Beethoven. A lot of people think this string quartet was kind of paying an homage to Mozart. There's a lot of similarities to a quartet that Mozart wrote. And then just like all of the quartets that we listen to, there are 4 movements in this one, and those movements tell you how fast or slow the piece is going to be. And then there's also the second movement here is a minuetto, so a little waltz. Something that makes Beethoven quartets different from, say, like an earlier quartet, someone who wrote before Beethoven was alive, is Beethoven was the person who started using all of the instruments a little bit more equally. So in early string quartets, you mainly just had first violin playing something and everyone else supported. Once we start getting to Beethoven and then later composers, all of the players have a little bit more equal footing. They have a little more importance. They get to play things like the melody a little bit more often. So very different types of music that you're hearing from different parts of the world, different kinds of composers. We talked about a lot, so let's review those goals and make sure that we hit them. Goal number 1 was, I can describe some common articulations used by string instruments. So we talked about articulations, what we do with our bow, pizzicato and arco, some slurs, and different things that we use with the bow to make different kinds of sounds. And then I can compare and contrast composers Beethoven, Glazunov, and Joplin. All of these men lived at very different times, but more importantly, very different parts of the world. And I think that their music really shows off what was important to the cultures at the time, and who they were as people as well. So thanks so much for joining. Hope you learned something new. Okay, so just like on all of our weeks of these videos, we have an activity that you can do. So if you head to our website and click on Education, there is a downloadable and a printable activity that you can do during the Belin Quartet concert tomorrow. Remember to tune in to that concert. It's at 6 p.m. and you can watch it the same way that you watch this video. And if you miss it live, you can still watch it for a full week after it airs. That's the really great thing about these live streams. If you end up doing that activity, feel free to send us a photo of you doing it. You can send it to info@civicmusic.org. And if you do that, you're going to be entered to win some free tickets for one of our concerts this year. I've had a great time doing this series with you this summer, and I hope you've learned some new things. See you at the concert tomorrow.